Hey guys, and welcome to Hopeful Consciousness, day 2 of my 14-day challenge to take you on the same journey that I had to hopefully a spiritual awakening moment. So two things interesting happened after my experience with the autobiography of a yogi. First thing, I wanted to confirm some of my findings scientifically, and then also look into Kriya Yoga, which is one of the things that they talk about in the book. Apologies, it's very bright in the background if it keeps changing from white to blue as I walk around the place. So yeah, basically I'll start with the scientific side first. The first thing I'd recommend doing is going on YouTube and having a look for people like Joe Dispenza, and then Sadhguru was the other one on the spiritual side that I started to have a look at. But I'll start with Joe Dispenza. So I got another book called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Joe Dispenza. And this is following on watching loads of his stuff on YouTube and things like that. So basically, he starts to talk about in his book about how you can use the power of your mind again for healing effects, and there's lots of messages that I kind of received from that, but this time all of it with a scientific basis and understanding, which was quite a different viewpoint. So you're now hearing things from a scientific point of view, confirming the science of everything that some of the stuff in the previous book told you. So that's quite a strange experience. I must admit, I only scratched the surface with Joe Dispenza. There's tons more stuff, and I'll get to that in later videos, because he's a fantastic guy, and I highly recommend all of his stuff. But yeah, the thing that really stood out, there was one thing in particular, is that you can use the power of your mind and your intention to kind of go beyond yourself and access these almost supernatural powers of healing and things like that. And the key thing that also stood out to me was a study they did about groups of people meditating to affect the world, which kind of dropped crime rates and things like that. But they also did it in a more specific setting. I think it was with cancer patients, where they did it on a specific ward, and they had a group of people focusing onto making the patients better. And they found that through thought and their sort of positive emotion, they could clinically influence the results of their treatments. But the really interesting part that took me away and sort of blew my mind a little bit was the fact that that result was not limited by time. And that's going to sound really weird. What it's basically saying, and he goes into the science and things in his book, is that you can meditate now, for example, with thought and emotion, to create an influence and a positive effect in the future and in the past. And that's a bit mind-blowing, because we've always been taught, you know, time is a very linear thing. So again, it was just a little point that opened my mind from a scientific point of view. And I'll go into more detail about Joe Dispenza and other things, because he features a bit on my journey. But it just started to show me from a scientific standpoint that some of this stuff might actually be possible, and perhaps the things I was reading in that first book weren't a load of rubbish. Yeah, so that leads on to following up from the book. They mentioned something called Kriya Yoga. Now, I don't know if you've heard much about yoga. Most people think it's kind of a exercise class in the gym, and that's really what it is over here in the UK, and I'm sure in other places of the world that's what it's been turned into, really. Just a way of keeping fit and healthy, and possibly meditating as well. But actually the word yoga, if you look it up on Wikipedia, that's what it pretty much says: meditation, exercise and things like that. But it actually means union. And that got me watching a chap called Sadhguru. So it's spelled S-A-D-H Guru, an Indian chap who's had a very interesting journey in his life, and he now sort of teaches these sort of principles and ideas, and I watched tons of his stuff on YouTube, and it just started to make sense, really. There's a couple of kind of key principles that he talks about, one of which is really quite interesting way of viewing things. And the best way to describe that is, how do you know that your body, say my hand here, is part of myself? Why do I call it part of my body? That's because I've got 5 senses plugged into this hand, telling me I can see it, I can smell it, I can touch it, I can taste it, etc. Not that you'd necessarily want to do all those things, but that tells me that my hand is my hand. If I cut my hand off, is it still part of me? Now that's an interesting question. That raises a few points. Well, suddenly it becomes separate from you. And you can go into the same principles of something a bit deeper of, is the banana over there part of me? No. Well, now I eat the banana, is it part of me? Yes, I guess, because it's inside me. That's kind of the thing. And when you take that to societal kind of levels, so if you look at, say, your friends and family, we treat ourselves as separate from them. So because of that, we have to have things like morals, values, and all these things that we learn from childhood growing up that teach us how we should act, how we should do things, how we should behave towards other people. And that's where a lot of the problems in the world and things stem from. It's just that he's separate from me. Oh, it's okay if I treat him, a little bit worse, or maybe even a little bit better, and then that person over there is separate from that person. Oh, he's he pushes my buttons, he's done things in the past, so I'll treat him slightly differently, and things like that. So the word yoga really means union. And let's just go back to talking about the senses in your body. So what if I said to you that, okay, if this hand is part of me, what if by extension of that person is part of me? So if that person comes under my experience of how I am, I no longer need to know morals of how I should treat him, how I should act, things I can and can't do to him. You wouldn't cut your finger off in the same way you wouldn't hurt someone else, because they're not separate, because you consider them part of you. And that's it, really. It's just these 5 senses that plug us in and tell us this is us. So if you can expand that, so you can actually almost feel others under your almost consciousness, it solves all of those problems, solves virtually all of the world's problems overnight, because suddenly you'll treat people how you want to be treated, because they are you. Very interesting concept. And that's what a yogi is, really. That's what a yogi means. A yogi is someone that's had the experience of having the entire universe fall under their consciousness. So that's just one of the key concepts that Sadhguru started to talk about. So I went and got his book called Inner Engineering, and he runs a workshop as well, which I later attended later in the year, and I'll get to that probably in my next tour or videos beyond this one. But yeah, that's the next step of my journey, really. And do please have a look on YouTube for Joe Dispenza and Sadhguru. You've got Joe Dispenza, who really does go into the science of it, of how these different things can sort of manifest, how you can use thought and intention and emotion to change things, change yourself, change things manifesting in reality. And then from the Eastern sort of perspective, you've got Sadhguru and his teachings, and I really do highly recommend having a look at his bits online. So that's my next little step along the journey, starting to look at that and delve into all of those videos. Just watch little clips here and there as and when you can, if you get the time to, and it might start to open your eyes as to a different way of thinking about things, and around thinking about the world as well. One of the great examples I particularly love, about how us humans, you know, we're always talking about how we damage the environment and things like that. So if you imagine taking that principle of extending your senses out beyond your body to encompassing things, it gets to the point where you start to encompass, for example, the trees behind us here as your lungs, because they're part of your breathing system, if you see what I mean. It's part of a system that we won't be able to breathe without the plants pumping out the oxygen. The plants rely on us to pump out the CO2 and other things in nature and stuff like that. So it's all part of the system. So it's just an extension of your lungs, really, if you think about it from that perspective. So yeah, I'll leave you with that little thought, and hopefully see you on day 3 for my next step. Cheers, bye.